To crosstalk the political crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by my guest, Daniel McAdams in Washington. He is the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute. Also in Washington, we have James Carafano. He is the Heritage Foundation's vice president, as well as a leading expert in national security and foreign policy. And in Paris, we cross to Jacques Cheminade. He is a former French presidential candidate and president of the Solidarity and Progressive Party. Our gentlemen, crosstalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Daniel, if I can go to you first, is Victoria Nuland happy right now?
Well, she got everything. She got her yachts in power. Klitsch is on the sideline. And good old Tiny is in the background now. So it looks like everything went according to plan. The UN has yet to glue it, but it looks like it's glued itself.
Okay, James, that was a very quick response there, Daniel. James, how do you see this? I mean, a regime change, almost to the word, to the dotted line. All the T's were crossed and the I's dotted.
This is just the first step in a very uncertain future. So this isn't settled. I thought your introduction was really heavily politically loaded. You know, first of all, to say it's Western-backed, I mean, I actually think the West just kind of sat there.
What did Victoria Nuland say to her ambassador? That's not meddling?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but...
Come on, that's meddling. That's meddling. That telephone conversation is absolute meddling, and that's why I started the program that way.
No, that's not meddling. Look, there's a difference between standing there and looking stupid and saying things on phones and waving and backing. I don't think anybody backed this. I mean, I think this. I mean, I don't think the Russians backed anything. I don't think the Americans backed anything. I think this is a lot of Ukrainians driving the train here, and I think we ought to start by saying this is whatever side you're on, however you think this want to turn out, this is largely an internally driven issue. And whether it's a coup or not, I think that's we need to get a constitutional lawyer on here.
Okay, well, Jacques, well, I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I can read the Constitution, and, well, the impeachment process was illegal. This unity government, how it was put together, was illegal. It's certainly not part of the Constitution. I mean, they went to the Maidan and they said, okay, here's a name, cheer. I mean, that sounds like a Roman circus to me. Jacques, how do you see this thing playing out? Because we'll talk about separatism in a little bit. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, what I see is resurgence, the comeback of the Stepan Bandera and Mykola Lebed groups. Victoria Nuland has encouraged them to roam around. They have been given money by British and American services. So there is a destabilization of Ukraine aiming at Russia, directly at Russia. And why is that? Because these Anglo-American interests know that the economic and financial international system is reaching an end. So they have to move to the east to loot more territory, to loot more populations. So that's the main reason of what happened in Ukraine. It's steered from abroad. Inside Ukraine, you have this disaster, this economic disaster. Yeah. The oligarchs have been stealing money all the time. There has been a kind of permanent complicity between the oligarchs and interests abroad, and there is no country, there is no law, and the new constitution is a piece of nothing because it has been imposed by parliament.
Okay,
no right to impose
Jacques, you brought up about like 10 points. You brought up about 10 points. Let's go through a few of them there. Daniel, one of the things in reading Western media coverage of what's going on in Ukraine is something that Jacques mentioned here, is there seems to be a great hesitation to talk about some of these groups and their backgrounds, okay? The right sector, Slobodna, these are very anti-Semitic, proto-fascist. I mean, some of the imagery that has come off of the Maidan, and some of these people are armed, and they certainly are armed now, okay? There seems to be this hesitation to look too deep into the opposition, or what I call the rioters.
Well, you know, there are so many similarities between what's happening in Ukraine and what's been happening in Syria over the past couple of years. On one hand, you have the al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria establishing facts on the ground. But you also have, and you have this certainly in Ukraine, and you had it in Egypt, you have a class of liberals in the country that have been the beneficiaries of USAID assistance and training. The Soros Foundation has been operating in Ukraine since 1990. He's taken some credit for these people. So on the one hand, you have the liberals who are doing the thinking, and then you have the thugs on the street. same in Egypt, same in Syria, same in Ukraine. I think the U.S. might be saving money by just using the same plan for each of these countries.
Okay, James, one of the things that's very dire here, I mean, we can talk about legitimacy, illegitimacy, we can go on and on about that, but the niceties or unniceties of what's going on in Ukraine is impending default, and that is extremely serious. The country is running out of money very, very quickly. I find it very interesting, I'll finish my point here, is that Viktor Yanukovich said publicly, you can find it on YouTube, that the United States has invested $5 billion in regime change, or to change things in Ukraine, let's put it that way. And then we have Secretary Kerry who's going to pony up $1 billion to help the economy. I mean, it's interesting they spend a lot of money to change the regime, but now they're not going to put much money up to stabilize the regime, the new regime.
Well, I mean, look, we disagree on a lot of things, but we all agree on the core issue, which is Ukraine is a mess. And it's largely a mess because you've had very corrupt leadership on all sides, and it's hard to find. It really is hard to find good guys.
Okay, I agree with you on that point. We set a precedent here. We agreed on that point. Go ahead, keep going, James. Please do.
No.
Is that Ukraine has been looted of much more money than what is needed now.
Okay. Well, look, I think, in all fairness here, I mean, Jacques, you're correct. Jacques, you're correct.
Now.
But I think we should make it clear to our viewers that the leadership or lack of leadership of Mr. Yanukovych was corrupt. But I can't think of one major politician in Ukraine that hasn't been truly corrupt. So let's not, point certain corruption on more or less on one leader. All of them have failed their people. And I think James and I would agree on that point. James, I want you, in fairness, I want you to finish your point. Go ahead. I want to finish. Go ahead.
No, the only thing I was going to say is, but somehow that saying that what's going on in the Ukraine is a deliberate strategy driven by the West. Look, I've been watching these guys since day one. Their depth of knowledge and interest in the Ukraine is what they see on CNN. Look, I mean, look at the European Union. Half of the European Union could care less about the Ukraine. And half of them would just wish the whole thing would go away. And in the United States, it's hard to get a reporter to even call me about this issue. So the notion that our government is deeply invested in what's going on in the Ukraine, it's just laughable.
Well, James, the evidence is there. You have the telephone conversation. You can't deny it. You can't make it go away. It's there. And as we started out the program, what she said on that telephone conversation has played out almost perfectly. Jacques in Paris, please jump in. You wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, that Ukraine has been looted, and it has been looted by these oligarchs. So these oligarchs are fighting each other, and the West, and I mean the West, the American and the British services mainly, and this Wall Street London oligarchy has now fully endorsed the Brzezinski strategy of not only stopping Russia, but trying to go ahead against Russia. And even Henry Kissinger had to say that Putin is right to feel that there is an intention for a regime change in Russia that started with Ukraine. So we are playing with fire, because on one side, the NATO strategy, military strategy, now is based on a first strike, and it's known. And on the Russian side, they are also based on the first strike, because they have lost their capacity of a ground army. So you have on the two sides a first strike doctrine and the confrontation in Ukraine. This is an immediate danger for a situation of World War III, of a Cuba missile crisis. But this time, the President of the United States is not John Fitzgerald Kennedy, it's Barack Obama, and that's another story.
Okay, Daniel, I'm surprised I'm going to agree with James on this program, because we usually don't. But he's right. I mean, whatever people are told about Ukraine in the United States may be neither here nor there. Unfortunately, I find it devastating that it's still framed in a Cold War attitude. But, going with Daniel here, Ukraine is on Russia's border, and there are millions of Russians in Ukraine. There are millions of Russian speakers. It is a very important issue to Russia.
The U.S. continues to accuse Russia of having a Cold War mentality because of their nervousness about what's happening on their border. Look, today, the NATO Secretary General was meeting with Ukrainian officials talking about closer cooperation with NATO. But the U.S. accuses Russia of having a Cold War mentality. Why is it not a Cold War mentality of the U.S. to push Russia to NATO's doorstep? And for the other point that your other guest made, this is the typical neocon response. They've put in money for years and years to have regime change. They put in millions of dollars for the Orange Revolution. That turned out badly. They put billions of dollars into this revolution. And then when it's done, when it's said and done, they'll step back and say, oh, we had nothing to do with it. It's all the people on the streets. They set this up from the beginning. They paid for it. They trained these people. This is a U.S. operation. Anyone who doesn't see that just simply doesn't want to.
All right, gentlemen, on that point, we're going to go to a short break. And after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Ukraine. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the recent developments in Ukraine. Okay, James, I'd like to go back to you in Washington. Okay, we can disagree about the origins of this, okay? I'm leaning towards Daniel's side here. But let's look at now and let's look forward. You know, I was brought up, if you go into a store and you break something, you have to buy it, okay? Now, it seems to me that the European Union and Washington, they have to buy this because, I've been to Kiev many, many times. I've been to Ukraine many times. It's a wonderful, wonderful country. And now it is on the abyss. I mean, you know, if you want regime change, I mean, it seems like so many institutions are running to greet this government that its legality is dubious at the very best. Is the West going to step in? And in some estimates, it's $35 billion this year. It'll have to be $35 billion next year, and probably more. What's going to happen?
You know, people might. Well, I think people might pony up some money to help with the debt relief. But look, nobody's going to step into the middle of trying to fix the Ukrainian problem. I mean, you know, as you pointed out, and when you look at the political class, it's hard to say there are really good guys there. And it's hard to see, you know, and it's very difficult to see what the path forward is. And I think Syria is actually a good model on this. I mean, you know, by and large, people are willing to step on the outside and throw a little stone in, but nobody's willing to jump into the morass of Syria. I don't think anybody's going to be really willing to jump into the middle of this either.
Okay,
so, which kind of, you know,
well, that's a scary thought, don't you think? That's a scary thought.
If this is a Western, no, but if this was really a Western-driven, you know, strategy, then the West would have a plan, and the West don't have a plan. And look, we have to look at this administration. The cornerstone of this administration, their goal has been cooperation with Russia. They wanted the New START treaty. They wanted Russian help in Syria. I mean, the last thing they wanted was to have an issue like this, where they're on a different side of the Russians and when there is no easy answer. So this, you can say what you want, but Ukraine is President Obama's worst nightmare.
Okay, well, Ukraine is Ukraine's worst nightmare right now. Daniel, jump in. Go ahead. Jump in, Daniel.
Then,
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. If it's the worst nightmare, then why is Victoria Nuland?
Why he appointed?
Okay, Jacques, go ahead in Paris. Go ahead.
Yeah, why he appointed Victor Yanukovich, who served as a principal deputy foreign policy advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney, why he appointed her. And this woman, her religion is Judaism, and then this woman has supported the neo-Nazis and fascists of Svoboda and the heirs of Stefan Bandera. That's terrible, and I have pictures in front of me showing Svoboda's Oleg Tyanibok.
We can spend the entire hour doing
the party salute, the Nazi party salute when. This is terrible.
Well, it is terrible, and I have to agree with Jacques that not enough of this is covered in Western media here. It's quite shocking, by the way. Daniel, I noticed you wanted to jump in there. I mean, again, I'll disagree with James. I mean, these plans, I mean, they do plan these things all the time, and you know what? They go wrong almost all of the time. We can go through Iraq, Afghanistan, we can go to Libya, what's happening in Syria right now. I mean, these plans never work.
What if the Tea Party set up tents on the Mall in Washington? They burned down the Democratic National Committee headquarters. They occupied Congress. They barricaded Boehner in his office. They demanded that Obama either overturn Obamacare or resign. What would the U.S. do? And what if Russian politicians came down in these encampments and started encouraging them, strategizing them, intercepted phone calls of how they said the overthrow would go? How would the U.S. react? Nobody wants to think about that here, the people who support this. You know,
James, what a lot of people are saying that are very critical. Let me go to James. Let me go to James in Washington. You know, James, what I hear from people, and I hear from Russians a lot, okay, that this is just a backdoor for NATO membership. And NATO wants, we've heard it before, they want Ukraine in the alliance, okay? How do you react to that? Because that is one thing that the West gets out of this, if they were to get it.
War.
No, go ahead. James in Washington, please.
Yeah, no, on the first point, look, we had that. We had Occupy, people in Occupy, you know, took over the mall and everything else. We didn't have that here because the United States has a healthy civil society, and so we resolved the issues. Ukraine doesn't have a healthy civil society, so the country melted down. On the issue of NATO expansion, look, this administration has been indifferent to NATO expansion. They didn't put it on the agenda. They don't even like to talk about it. They don't care about it. And so that ain't going to happen. And if you look at Ukraine, the Ukraine would never qualify as a member of NATO right now anyway. So this is simply a red herring that somehow Ukraine's going to join NATO. And that's what this is all about.
Then why is Rasmussen meeting with Ukrainian officials talking about continued cooperation and increased cooperation?
James,
if they have no intention of
you know, we have a
Mediterranean dialogue.
We have a Mediterranean dialogue.
Meeting with them?
Well, I mean, we have a Mediterranean dialogue. NATO dialogues with all the countries in North Africa. Are they going to join NATO? No.
Okay, Jacques.
Okay,
let me go to Jacques in Paris here. We heard, you know, words coming out of Western capitals that they want to help Ukraine, but it seems at the time that they needed help most with, and I'll express my opinion here, with a very dubious government right now that has, if you look at the people that have been listed, it's about 30% of parties that were elected in the last parliament here. So it's a very minority. It's very narrow right now, and we haven't even talked about the issue of separatism in the East here. I mean, again, you know, it seems like the West supports this, but they're not going to follow through.
How the European Union and how the United States could help Ukraine when they are killing Greece? They cannot even do something for Greece. They let Greece down. They let the country being destroyed. They let the Greek economy being destroyed. How they would pretend to help Ukraine, this is not the issue. It's people in the city of London and Wall Street, and it is not the whole West. It's people, a faction in the city of London and Wall Street who want to keep their power, and for that they have to move east, and this is what they are doing. And it's similar, not in terms of what they are exactly doing, but it's exactly similar in terms of intention of the move east that Hitler proceeded. It's the same. It's this time with financial interest, this time it's for economic interest, but it's on the same issue. The Nazis looted Ukraine. Now the issue for these financial powers in the West is looting, and they go ahead allying with people that represent exactly the opposite of the human rights and democracy.
Okay, Daniel, that's a very good point. Jacques brings up a very good point here. You know, Daniel, thank you. Let me go to Daniel in Washington. I mean, one of the things, you know, on the ground here is that I have a lot of friends. I live here in Moscow. I have a lot of friends here, and they have family in Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, and there is real fear right now. And considering the profile, high-profile people, there are good people in Kiev that were protesting. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with this very narrow leadership and their political coloration. That political coloration, neo-Nazi, let's just say it, and people in the East are terrified of it, and they're worried that it's going to come there. Then we talk about separatism, and that is in no one's interest.
Well, look, you have a mini Maidan in Crimea right now, but it's very interesting to see how the Western media treats.
Go ahead, Daniel.
How the media in the West treats the two different events. The Maidan in Kiev, they were protesters protesting for democracy. The mini Maidan in Crimea now, they're called gunmen. The gunmen have occupied parliament. NATO Secretary General Rasmussen said today it was dangerous and irresponsible for these people to occupy the parliament. It's exactly what they did in Kiev a couple of weeks ago when the West was praising the outbreak of democracy. So democracy is what the West says it is. It has nothing to do with the sacred vote of people in the voting booth.
Okay, James, one of the things, let me go to James here. One of the things I think is really interesting here is that, again, in looking at coverage of the events in Ukraine, almost everybody in Western media forgot about the Orange Revolution. Oh, you had the protesters in Maidan, you overthrew the government, you had an election, then they got disillusioned with the elected government, and then you know what? Mr. Yanukovych came back. I mean, everybody seems to forget that. Why is it, what tells us it won't happen again, the same cycle?
Well, and I think you get to, you and I agree too much. We need to get these other guys on a different show. Look, this is, no. I mean, this is largely the Ukrainians' fault. They have mismanaged their own freedom, and you have a corrupt political class, and they only break out of this cycle when they actually move on a path of Ukrainians taking care of Ukrainians. And I take the point about the people of Crimea and their fears. I mean, we ought to be working, I mean, the only way they're going to move forward if it's a process of national reconciliation. Actually, I think the closest thing for me here is the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And the key point there is after they threw James II out of the country, they didn't go around and slaughter every Catholic in the country. They realized that they can only move forward as a nation if they all move forward together. And they all move forward in some degree of respect for individual human dignity and human rights, and an opportunity for everybody to have a constructive future. If the people of the Ukraine don't decide to do that, then we're just going to either sit back and watch a disaster from both sides, or people from West or from Russia are going to intervene, and that ain't going to be pretty either.
Okay, Daniel, I'll give you the last word on the program here. Where is it going in your mind?
Well, the U.S. and the West is creating Yugoslavia on steroids in Ukraine right now. Bush was extraordinarily reckless in his foreign policy, going to war on lies. President Obama makes Bush look like a piker. He's putting us to the brink of a nuclear war in a wrong-headed foreign policy. Things I think are going to go very, very badly.
Okay, let's keep our fingers crossed, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in Paris. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.